Hey everybody, welcome back to American History class with Mr. Finn. So today we are going to get right up to the beginning of the Revolution. But it's important that you have an idea of how long this takes. So when we're looking at this time period, when you teach American history, sometimes you get quick into the Revolution from one thing to another thing to another thing. In today's world, everything happens so fast that it's important to understand that this took some time. So, for example, 1766 is when we are going to see something that you know called the Stamp Act. And now that process that I was talking to you about over the last two classes of, hey, England puts a tax on the colonies boycott, England repeals it, the colonies are happy, England puts a new tax, they boycott it, England repeals it after the merchants go crazy. That doesn't just happen like in a month. You know, this takes time. Plus, you have to remember, this is a time period when news took a long time to get to people. There wasn't like, pick up the phone or send a tweet, hey, King of England, we don't like this. I mean, this took months to get messages back and forth. So this process sometimes gets confusing when you're the student because you think, okay, this happened. A year later, hey, war breaks out. But that's not the case. So 1776 is the Stamp Act. It takes about 10 years, almost 10 years, to see Lexington, and that was one of your terms that you were looking up, and Concord, which is going to see fighting break out between the colonists and English and the English soldiers. So this is a period of time, and there's a lot of things that happen. So we're going to make that run-up today to Lexington and Concord. However, because of last class, you should have a good idea of the things that are coming today. That's why I had you do that assignment. But again, it takes some time for these events that I'm about to tell you to unfold. So if you remember, we went from, I shouldn't have erased Stamp Act because I have to put it back up, Stamp Act, to the boycott, to the Townsend Acts, or the duties. And then we're going to have some other events happen during this time period. If you remember, the Townsend Acts were on lead, glass, and tea. And what was the one that we didn't take it away on? Tea. Tea continued to be taxed in the colonies, and the colonists did not like this. Meanwhile, people are getting up in arms. There's groups like the Sons of Liberty that you looked at, which was almost an underground organization that was, out there trying to make trouble, stir up controversy. Because not everybody, that's another thing that we lose track of, not everybody was upset with these taxes. A lot of people were like, okay, that makes sense. And there was a lot of people that were like, I just don't care. But not a big deal. There was only about, just as far as numbers go, 2/5 of the population. So to put that in a percentage of sorts, you're looking at, less than, around 30% or less than 30% in there. Because if you have 2 out of 6, it would be 30%. So you're talking 30% or under in general if we're looking at roundabout numbers. That's not a ton of people that want to be involved in this uprising of, getting upset over these taxes. But to continue on, we have a relatively smaller group that want to be involved. The Townsend Acts leave a tax on tea. Colonists are upset. We have a couple of events happen. Now, we have the Boston Tea Party. That's a fun party, right? The Boston Tea Party, and you probably should know this from your assignment already, but if you didn't get it, let me just tell you. Boston Tea Party is going to be basically, England decides to sell a bunch of tea to the colonies at like half price. But the Sons of Liberty and the people that are angry about it are like, no, we're not going to let them get away with this. Because they know that there's a lot of people that would be like, oh, this is good, cheap. They're cutting the price. I'll buy a lot of it. And so the Sons of Liberty and the people that were against these taxes are going to go onto this ship. And the Boston Tea Party is going to be, they destroy tea, what's called cargo, meaning it's in boxes, the tea is there, and they sneak onto this ship, and they toss all this tea into the Boston Harbor. Now, some people think of it like, oh, they destroyed some tea and whatever else. This is going to be a lot of tea. We're talking about like, $1 million. God, I can't even get that out. $1 million worth of tea. $1 million worth of tea. That's a lot of tea. That's not just a little bit. That's a lot of it. And so England's like, that's it. We're done. They're going to put these, what's called the coercive acts. Coercive acts. And this is really when England is going to put its foot down with these coercive acts. The coercive acts, and you don't need to know every part of like the coercive acts, but they're called the Intolerable Acts by the colonists, meaning they're really not good. And what it does is England says, we're going to shut down your local governments. We're going to shut down Boston Harbor. We're going to impose the Quartering Act, which is the reason why I had it up on the board, where literally soldiers from England would have to stay at the colonists' houses. I mean, if I had a house, the Quartering Act would say, like, I have to open my door and say, come on in, soldier, sleep in my bed. Here's a room for you. Like, we are putting you up. So England's not messing around anymore. As soon as the Boston Tea Party happens, they're just dropping the hammer on Boston. Hey, shutting down your government, shutting down your harbor. People are going to go broke. We have the Quartering Act. This is not good. People are starting to get really, really upset. Another important thing that happens during this time period, on this run-up to the Battle of Lexington and Concord, is going to be another one of your terms, which was the Boston Massacre. All right, so what is the Boston Massacre? Well, it's funny. If you just look at it, and you know now because you went and looked at the definition, Boston Massacre sounds really bad, like a massacre, like hundreds, thousands of people dead. No, it was just a handful of people, and the in and out of the story is basically this. There are British soldiers who are on guard, and there is a group of group of citizens and children and everyone that were, basically harassing the soldiers, throwing stuff at them, yelling at them, just being a mob of people. And so what ends up happening is nobody knows, who fired what. However, in the end, the Boston Massacre is going to result in some colonists are going to be killed. In fact, the first colonist who is killed is named Crispus Attucks. It's an African-American man, is sometimes considered the first casualty of the Revolution. But this is happening before Lexington and Concord, before Bunker Hill, which we'll get to. But the Boston Massacre is going to be another thing that is going to elevate tensions. So when I say tensions, tensions are up. So tensions are people on edge. People are like, I don't trust them, we don't get along. And all of a sudden, the Boston Massacre happens, and like some of the American colonists are shot. And people are like, oh my God, the British soldiers are firing at crowds of American colonists. And people like the organization like Sons of Liberty are like, this is, we're going to use this. Like, oh my God, let's spread the word across all of the colonies. What are the British doing to the people of Boston? They're taking away their God-given rights as Englishmen, is what they would have said at the time, under Enlightenment thinking. And this was starting to spread, this message like, whoa, what is going on with the British and these people in Boston? This is not very good, all of which are inflaming tension. So the people of Massachusetts, in particular Boston, are really in a bad spot. They don't trust the British. The British have done some things to them. They've done some things to the British, and back and forth, and there's no trust at all. Out of all of the 13 colonies during this time period, the heart of like the hatred and distrust of the British, meaning the English, is coming from Boston. If you lived in Boston, you would probably be not a big fan of the British, which leads us to Lexington and Concord, where I'm going to stop today. And you've already looked at it, but really the heart and the problem of Lexington and Concord is at Lexington and Concord, you have weapons. Weapons stored at, and you know Lexington and Concord, so you use an L and a C. So weapons are stored at Lexington and Concord, which are two small villages, and they're held onto by the militia. The militia, again, being people who were just farmers or shopkeepers or whatever. Those people are the militia, and they make up this group that would have protected Lexington and Concord if something were to happen. And because they didn't trust the British, they had weapons. Everyone had guns back then, and the British hear that weapons are being stockpiled in the towns of Lexington and Concord, and that's going to lead the British to go there to basically confiscate or take those guns from the militiamen at Lexington and Concord. And that's where I wanted to get up to, because I want to talk next time about Lexington and Concord. But today, ladies and gentlemen, on your paper, we'll put 1 through 5. It is quiz time. So, let's see what we got. I want to go, and the quizzes are all encompassing. So this is going to be questions that could range from the beginning of the class to now. But let's start with number 1. Number 1. Who was the King of England during the American Revolution? Who was the King of England during the American Revolution? All right, let's see. What else do I want to get at here with you guys? Let's go with, here's a good one. Number 2. This was the economic theory of the 1600s and 1700s, in which you should collect as much gold and silver as you can, and you should have more exports than you do imports. Again, it's in your notes. You can use your notes. It's okay. What was the economic theory that dominated the 16 and 1700s? Might throw you an easy one here. Let's see. I'll do one easy one, one hard one, then I'll give one throwback one. The easy one. How many colonies made up the American colonies? How many were there? How many colonies made up the American colonies? Number 3. I'm assuming you're pausing and looking these up. Number 4. And this is the harder one, but again, you should have it. These are people who agreed to work for someone else for a period of 5 to 7 years so that they could get passage or a trip to the American colonies to make their fortune, get land, or whatever else. They agreed that they would work for someone for 5 to 7 years. That person paid for them to come to America with them, and they worked for them for 5 to 7 years. What were those people called? You have it. You have it. And then number 5. Who was the leader? Who was the king of the Aztecs? Hint, hint. It's from the beginning. Who was the leader or the king of the Aztecs? What was his name for number 5? All right, make sure I see these today. You guys have been doing a fantastic job getting them to me. I need them today because I need to have it in for participation and attendance purposes. But again, you guys have been doing great, and I'll look forward to seeing you next class.